I'm Joe Pardavila. This is the Forbes Books Podcast. And back in the dark old days of 2020, the idea of putting together a live marketing activation or concert seemed like a crazy idea. It was bananas. But in 2022, live events came back in a big way. The Detroit Auto Show came back after a 3.5-year hiatus. Coachella was back after a 2-year break. And Live Nation says they sold more than 100 million tickets through July of 22 compared to 74 million in 2019. Brands large and small are once again embracing live marketing activations, and joining me today to talk more about it is Rachel Doyon, the founder of Collabarét, a creative agency that produces activations around the globe for private clients and partners through storytelling, strategic campaigns, and experiential events. Rachel, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, Rachel, I have this theory or hypothesis that artists make great entrepreneurs because they sort of have that entrepreneurial spirit where you kind of have to have multiple skills, you kind of have to be good at business, or you won't be able to succeed. And I feel like that sort of fits you as well because you're a creative, you're an artist, but you're also an entrepreneur. What do you think of my theory that artists can be great entrepreneurs?
I would completely agree. This is actually something that I try to express to all the artists in my community every time we speak, because I do always feel like artists should be portrayed as entrepreneurs. Even if they don't choose to take the classically entrepreneurial route, they're still entrepreneurs at the heart because they're out there, especially in the entertainment industry these days. They're out there having to promote themselves. They have to network. They have to advocate. They have to negotiate. It's a lot that goes into being an artist, and it's very, very similar to being an entrepreneur. So I would completely agree.
Yeah, and it's usually the big names that are making the headlines, like the Jay-Z's and the Ryan Reynolds of the world who are making big bank. But there are other artists who you don't even hear about who are succeeding as entrepreneurs. You have actors, singers, artists that have honed these skills like social media, marketing, budgeting. And I think traditional entrepreneurs, they're usually, subject matter experts. They do this one thing well, but they don't have these other sets of skills that help them become successful entrepreneurs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think something that goes to show with artists is that when you're super passionate about something, which most artists are, if they're pursuing a craft that they feel could be their career, that passion will translate through anything that they do. And they're just really never going to give up. And a lot of entrepreneurs out there, they might have their why, but passion is a completely different beast. It's something that keeps you up, keeps you going, no matter how difficult the journey might be. And entrepreneurship is no easy feat. And becoming an artist in this day and age is also no easy feat.
Yeah, it's funny too because people always joke that there's too many podcasts out there. And then I'm like, well, are there too many songs? Are there too many movies? Are there too many TV shows? It's like, let people become artists. Let people do what they want to do. So I always push back when people say, there's too much of this one thing. I'm like, what do you care? It's just basically just live your life. These are people creating stuff. Why would you care if they're creating stuff? It's no hindrance on you. It doesn't, if you choose not to listen or watch that one thing, there's no need. So, and artists sort of have to have that spirit where they're like, hey, I'm making a thing for people. And I think a lot of folks who aren't on the creative side don't know about that sort of, whether it's a gene or sort of foible or what flaw in their human body that they have to create for other people. Where does that come from for you? Have you always been this person that wants to create and make things for others?
For me, I grew up really honing in my craft as being a writer. I started writing at a very young age, and everyone would always ask me, what are your favorite authors? Like, what are your favorite books? And I never really had an answer because that was never what inspired me to write. I just wanted to write because I wanted everybody to kind of figure out what was in my internal world. I wanted to figure out what was going on in my internal world. And I just wanted to share my voice. And that was always what guided me. And it's something that I took with me in creating Collabarét too. Like, it started from this place of being an artist and seeing a need to collaborate with other artists from different industries and knowing that my voice may be different than theirs, but how can our voice be better together?
So you were this junior writer creating things on your own, fast forward to founding Collabarét, but I want to fill in the gaps there. What kind of steps did you take to start a creative company like Collaborate? Because it's not like one day Rachel, 16 years old, was like, "Hey, I think I'm going to own a creative agency one day." So what did you do along the way that brought you here?
Oh my gosh, so many things. You would never know, like when you don't wake up one day and you're like, okay, I'm going to start this company. I think it was getting a lot of no's, honestly. Like I went to university for creative writing. It was the first time I had to be in an educational system where my passion was being graded, so to speak, and that was quite difficult for me. And I actually decided to move out of that focus and go into musicology, and that provided a lot of kind of this new world perspective, where I was able to study the culture of communities, understand what people gravitate to music for. And what I really wanted to do after graduating was to become a talent agent.
Hmm.
And I tried, trust me.
Hmm.
I was trying to meet all the possible people. They say you have to know the right people to get into the right places. And in that industry, it definitely rings true. So I actually I went to become a waitress at Soho House because I had heard Soho House is full of all these entrepreneurs and
Hmm.
industry executives, the people that you want to be in the room with, right? And it was true. I loved working there. I loved being able to meet these people. But something that came to me through that process was I didn't necessarily want to be a talent agent. I did want to work with artists, but I wanted to find my own way to help them. And that's kind of where Collaborate came from. I saw that there needed to be more inclusive creative experiences, a better platform for artists. It wasn't necessarily that they needed an agent, they needed an advocate.
Mm. And I know you launched the company in 19 with the idea of it being this sort of, I guess, a live production. Like, as a New Yorker, I know that all those the live interactive shows are very big there, and I know that was part of what you were doing. You're doing sort of like this live storytelling, experiential events. But then 2020 rolls around, and that those kind of events are just done. They're just closed down. So what were you thinking? Because you start the company in 19, and then 20 rolls around, and this horrific catastrophe happens. Were you like questioning everything, every decision you made in your life at that point? Like, what was I thinking?
Oh my gosh, yes. And it was wild because we had planned our biggest event to date on March 8th for International Women's Day. And the same day we got that emergency text from like the state of New York, where it's like everybody's going into a state of emergency, like quarantine in your homes, and panic kind of erupts. And it was in this moment where I had to look at my collaborators through this project and kind of ask them, is it a wise decision to move forward with this event? Because we had booked it out at the William Vale. We had Suzanne Rockefeller as the moderator. We had all ages coming into attendance. And, as I said, this was our biggest production to date. We had over 500 people that were planning to come. And after many conversations with several mentors I had at the time, it's always good to have a network of kind of people you can call on for different moments that might
Mhm.
happen where you need advice at the drop of a hat. So I did that with this former boss of mine who was the chief of HR, and she was just always incredible for me. And she said, "I think you should, move forward with the event." And so we ended up having the event. Luckily, nobody got sick, nothing terrible happened, but it did put into focus this self-reflection of what do I do now? So I went into full panic mode, as you mentioned, and
Mhm.
I ended up getting in the car with my two best friends, and we drove all the way from New York to Georgia, to the North Georgia mountains, and locked ourselves in their lake house for 5 months. And at that time, I was trying to figure out what to do next, but we really didn't skip a beat. We ended up launching a digital series across Instagram called Me, Myself, and IQL, which was short for In Quarantine Life.
Mhm.
And it was really cool to be able to work with artists from around the world for the first time, right? We weren't limited by location anymore. So we started to see the beauty in that. We hosted, I think, somewhere between like over 2 months of nonstop IG live performances. They're all archived on our Instagram now. We even had some really cool, we tried our hand at replicating this live collaborative factor where we would have a makeup artist in Norway who was creating a makeup look inspired by this musician who was based in Miami. And that was really beautiful. We had a belly dancer from New York collaborating with a harpist in Taiwan. I mean, we were really pulling out all the stops and trying to translate this authentic, connected experience that Collaborate was emulating into the digital world.
Hmm.
So that continued on into the Black Lives Matter movement, and we had another series called Perspective, where we featured 18 Black female artists from around the world, and that was pretty powerful and incredible. And we raised money as well for different nonprofits. And from there, I decided to make a big life change. I was quarantined in Georgia for 5 months. New York was not looking like the right place to be after living there for 10 years. And I just decided I was going to move to Germany.
Germany. Now, were you throwing darts at a board or something like that? Why Germany?
Well, I was in a long distance relationship at the time, and he was based in Berlin. But aside from that, I had been in Berlin earlier that year for the Forbes 30 Under 30 Summit and connected with some really cool entrepreneurs and startups in the creative space out there. And everyone was always telling me like Berlin is like this creative hub. It's like the new art capital of the world. And I had already done a Collaborate event in Paris in January of 2019. So I knew that the European market was ready. I mean, Collaborate is, of course, inspired by like European cabaret shows. So, I just decided why not give it a shot? And I made that big move.
Wow. And I know that your father once said that you should never live in the same city for more than a decade. Um, where does this nomadic life come from? Just the idea of going from like New York to Georgia to Berlin. I'm sure there were other stops along the way over the course of your life. What does it feel like to be this kind of person? Because I'm a homebody. I like having a home base, knowing where I'm going to be for the next 10 years. But you don't seem like you have that. What is it about that sort of part of Rachel Doyon's DNA?
Well, you're right. My dad did say to never live in the same place for more than a decade. He was a world traveler. He spoke 3 different languages. And, I was raised by my mom actually, and she was a major homebody, has never left really the state of Georgia. So I think being raised by two very different types of parents, you kind of find a way to navigate this identity on your own. And although I enjoy traveling, I do still find a way to make every place I go to feel like home. Like I'm all about a cozy
Hmm.
environment. I have the same friendships I've had since I was 5 years old. I carry them with me. Like I'm very selective with the people I kind of bring into my circle and share my internal world with, so that the greater world doesn't always feel so big and isolating, but more so smaller and more room for collaboration.
Interesting. Okay. And looking back now at the last 3 years, I feel like 2021 was sort of like a lost year. And what I mean by that is we all know 2020 was the year the pandemic shut everything down. 2022, we were sort of kind of getting back to normal. But to be honest with you, if you ask me what 2021 was like, I have no idea. So what was Collaborate doing in 21 when we were sort of like in this sort of like stuck in the middle with you kind of thing where it was like you were going from pandemic to pre-pandemic levels in 22. What was going on in 21 for your company?
Wow. I mean, I love that you asked this question because I was also kind of thinking this, like reflecting before our conversation and looking back on like where Collaborate is now and what was happening. And in 2021, Collaborate was not doing anything, which is like really crazy to say. But I think it was an amazing space. I think for me, it was really important to kind of understand my own identity separate from Collaborate because I had kind of grown up with Collaborate and I was so attached to it as my company that I didn't really know where I could was growing and could come back and make it a better company.
Hmm. And so let's speed things up to 22. What is Collaborate doing?
So now Collaborate is like a fully functioning digital agency, which is really exciting to say. So in 2021, I was working to like hone in my different skills throughout like the marketing realm. So I worked with a startup and built their influencer marketing department from the ground up and explored that side of things. I've worked with other brands and on content strategy and campaign development. So now I'm just taking on different clients. I currently have 3 clients, all based in different cities around the world,
Of
and I'm
course.
doing different things in the marketing space. So for me, my personality, it's a perfect fit because I'm able to explore all these different creative zones and bring in exactly what I'm good at. And that was what I needed to take the time to discover throughout 2021.
Nice. And so, let's give the Collaborate the old plug. What kind of activations are you working on? You mentioned you're working with 3 different organizations, but what kind of events? If you don't want to name drop, that's cool. But talk to me about some of the stuff you're working on.
Well, right now I'm working on a really cool production throughout basically between Berlin and New York, where we want to create kind of this like experiential portal between both cities by showcasing Berlin artists in New York and New York artists in Berlin. So I'm working with different clients, I would say spread across both Web 2 and Web 3, but you asked me again what I was doing in
Mhm.
2021. I was definitely diving into the world of NFTs. So that's kind of been carried with me throughout this new kind of iteration of Collaborate. So trying to figure out how to integrate both this digital and physical space while still honing in on an authentic real life
Hmm.
experience.
And I just finished reading the Matthew Ball book, The Metaverse, and
Mm,
I feel like we're way, way away from an actual metaverse because I think there's too many complex things that have to happen. I think we don't have the hardware yet. This idea of marrying companies together, because in the metaverse, conceivably, you can wear your Nike gear into an Adidas thing, and I don't think any of those companies want to do that. But for a metaverse to exist, all of these brands need to sort of become more intertwined. You need to be able to buy stuff that you bought in your Call of Duty game and be able to use it in Fortnite. Like those are the barriers
mm,
that we're going to need to be able to get to, because right now all of these separate companies are all siloed out and they really don't want to share their audience. But part of the metaverse for it to work is this shared experience for folks. So what are you seeing as the future of the metaverse? And I know for many people, the metaverse has many different forms that it's going to take in the future. But have you thought about it deeply in terms of how Collaborate will fit in that space?
I haven't quite figured out exactly where Collaborate fits in. I'm still very much exploring the space with curiosity. I think there's a lot going on right now, and there's a lot to kind of like trek through, and there's a lot of weeding out that is going to have to happen. What I'm more focused on is exploring this world of like extended reality and how we can create live experiences that may be gamified or onboard people through live interaction. So let's say you have like a painting and somebody holds their phone up and then it's like an augmented reality experience. Like I'm more interested in like leaving the technology throughout the actual live event as opposed to bringing the real life factor into the technology, I guess.
And you mentioned NFTs, and I am not bullish on NFTs and cryptocurrency right now. And I'm not one of these people like old man shouting at the sky kind of thing. But I just don't see the utility of it yet until we have
Mm,
this full blown metaverse where people can show off their NFTs. Like the idea of spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on a work of art that no one will probably see seems weird to me. But I guess
mhm,
I
mhm,
guess whatever. And then obviously cryptocurrency. My argument to with that is the fact that for all these years, you've been hearing how crypto can be unaffected by the world's markets. Nothing can ever affect the value of cryptocurrency. Well, then you see the global economy tank, and then crypto tanks. So I
mm.
have a trouble really wrapping my brain around both of those. But again, I see that there's a future in them. So how do you bridge the gap from the early adopter to when it finally arrives and becomes a thing? Is it just you just continuing to stay educated in it and keeping your foot and toe in the door kind of thing? Or because that's my thing. I think we all need to be aware, and obviously companies are spending a lot of money investing in metaverse technologies, NFTs, what have you. But not everyone has has millions of dollars to invest in stuff like that. So for the folks who don't have that capital, how would you advise folks when it comes to approaching these Web 3.0 metaverse NFT technologies?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it can be super overwhelming, and I'm no expert. I just want to put that out there. I think my best advice would be to yeah, continue learning, finding certain people to have conversations with about it, making sure you're not taking one person's advice because there aren't that many experts in this space. It's still very new. And I do think this goes to say like crypto can be quite volatile because similar to the stock market, it is based, a lot of people make choices on emotion. And that's why we see crashes happening on a consistent basis that are very in line with what's happening in the stock market. I think in terms of utility, the NFT world is a bit more, I think it has more of a light at the end of the tunnel for me, because there is a way to build a community through NFTs. And I just kind of position it as this like new form of a membership club, right?
Hmm.
So let's say you're really interested in, a specific artist, and you want to have exclusive access to their new single drops before anybody else, or you want to have backstage passes to all their shows, like you have the opportunity to buy one of their NFTs and receive that for the first time ever. And it's
Hmm.
also giving artists a chance to work outside of traditional norms of having to sign with a record label and give away their rights. And they're also able to finally get royalties on secondary sales. So that's really cool. And I think there's a lot of hope in that side of it.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I see the future in NFTs is it's to me. I almost treat it like podcasting, where if you're a person who sees yourself as a communicator and is great with the audio medium, you create podcasts. Now, artists
Mm.
who have trouble reaching an audience because, say, they're traditional artists, paint and canvas, and they have to go to galleries and sell them on the street or what have you. With NFTs, you can sell your art to the globe, to the masses, very easily with a very low barrier of entry, just like podcasters. You could do a podcast with an iPhone and an internet connection, and you're good to go. NFTs, same stuff. You can create all this magic, put it out to the masses in a relatively cheap fashion.
Definitely. I mean, but there's still, that goes with any form of art, right? Like whether it be in Web 2 or Web 3. But what still stands strong is like quality
Mm.
and utility. It's like, what are you actually trying to say to the world through what you're doing, whether it's a podcast, your art, your company? It doesn't matter. You just have to really be kind of sure in what that is and stay true to that. And I think that in the NFT space, it gets a bad rap because there's a lot of people coming in and creating these really cheesy PFP, which is like a profile picture project, and they're saying that this is art, but it was generated by a machine, and then it's discrediting the actual, let's say, quote unquote, artists that are in the space that are trying to actually find a career in what they're good at.
Yeah. Yeah, and obviously there's always going to be bad people in any form of business, and we're recording this interview the day that Sam Bankman-Fried,
Yes.
was arrested. The former crypto king, and so you're going to see these stories of people doing bad things. But just I think it's great that, like I talked about earlier, like if you want to be a podcast and you want to do podcasts, do it. If you want to be an artist, make NFTs, do it. But unfortunately, the folks who are doing the bad things are going to get the headlines. And when we talk about the value of Bitcoin, the only time you ever hear about it is when there's massive dips. So staying positive is probably incredibly important. So talk to me, and you seem like a very positive person. How do you maintain your positivity?
Yeah, a lot of people come to me and say that, and I've always found it to be like in part compliment, but then in part I'm like, well, really? Do I come off that way? Because I am so into like discovering my dark side and like really digging deep into my emotions and like doing a lot of identity work and really working through my flaws and bad habits. It's like something I try to practice every day. It's like just working on sharpening my self awareness so I can be a better friend, a better in a better relationship, be a better leader. It's just like a better human altogether. And sometimes there's a lot of negative stuff that comes with that process. And I think for me, like I can be quite optimistic. Like I definitely lean towards the light at the end of the tunnel vibe. But there are days, multiple days on end, where I could be the one who has a dark cloud over their head. So it's just knowing when to kind of give yourself a bit of patience and compassion, and then also being grateful for the things you do have that are positive that are in your life.
And during the course of this conversation, I've learned that you're not afraid to try new things and go in different places. And on TikTok, once you said trying new things is the key to confidence. Knowing it won't be perfect, but going for it anyways takes you one step closer to compassionate self love. Where does this come from? Where does this idea of being able to try new things and give confidence? Because I think most people on the outside, Rachel, will be like, no, trying things is hard because when you first try something, you're not very good at it and it's discouraging and you don't feel good about yourself. But where does this fearlessness come from to try new things?
I think it comes from my mom. As I mentioned, I was raised by my mom. So in a lot of ways, it was just, her and I. And she was always so supportive of me trying anything new. Like one day, if I wanted to be a singer, she's putting me in classes. If I want to be a dancer, she's putting me in classes. If I wanted to try swim team, soccer, softball, comedy, you name it, she was so supportive of me just being multifaceted. And in fact, she loved, like, the busier I could keep my extracurriculars, the happier I was. And therefore, she was always just pushing me to pursue any interest that came to mind. It did become challenging when I wanted to quit those things, because that's a big part of it too. It's like learning when you might have tried something and it wasn't the right fit for you, and knowing when to kind of say no and try something else. I think that's been a big learning for me over the last few years. And that goes with attachment, right? We get attached to these identities that we create for ourselves, whether they are through trying something new or not trying anything at all. It's just like being open enough and honest with yourself to know, like, when you should say yes to something new and when you should kind of say no.
Hmm. And how do you handle failure? Because I, for one, I try to take the aggressive approach to handling failure. So if I get turned down on something or don't get accepted for something, the way I think about it is it's their loss. Listen,
Mm.
I know I'm good at blank, and I will probably be better at blank than anybody else. And I know that could probably be like an egotistical way of handling things, but in a way that sort of keeps me sane in handling rejection, because we all kind of have to deal with it, and we all have to process it. And to me, is they're wrong, I'm right. It may not be the best way to handle things, but I think that's sort of like maintains your confidence, because after so many rejections, we're all human beings. After a while, we get beaten down. Like, man, maybe it's not the right fit. So how do you handle failure?
That is definitely one way to handle it, and I see a lot of people handling that way. I don't think there's any right or wrong way. For me personally, I tend to like lean towards dissecting why I may have failed something, and actually like looking at where I could have done better and taking it as like a learning experience to then kind of keep improving myself to move on to that next opportunity that's going to present itself, because there's always going to be something that comes along that's going to be a better, more aligned fit for you. But it's still important to have that moment of self-reflection, because in order to attract better opportunities, I think we do need to consistently be working on bettering ourselves.
Hmm. And we talked about the past and what brought you here to the present of Collaborate, but what's the future look like? What do you obviously are a big goals, big dreamer. What do you want to do next with the company?
So I'm really excited where the company is going now. I'm looking to build out my team, so that's a really exciting opportunity for me. I'm bringing on some more clients. I'm actually finally in the position where I can kind of pick and choose the clients that I work with, and that's awesome and empowering. I'm also working on my personal brand a bit more. Like, as I mentioned before, I was always there to kind of build community and elevate other artists, and I worked in influencer marketing, so I really see the value in that space, and I really want to kind of put myself forward a bit more.
Hmm.
And I started writing my first book in lockdown, so I'm not sure when that would be released, but I'm definitely not forgetting about doing that.
Awesome. That's great. Well, it is funny because I'm old enough to remember when the word brands meant like McDonald's and Sears, and now people are brands. When you
Mm.
advise people about building a brand for themselves, what are some of the initial steps? I mean, obviously, you have to have a base. That brand has to do X, Y, Z. But what is it that makes a brand and what makes it pop? I mean, you're obviously in the middle of doing it for yourself, but you've advised many people over the years. So, what makes a brand pop on a human level?
I think it's just really ironing out your core values. That's so important. And I always talk to brands and people and ask them, what are your internal values and what are your external values? What are the values that you hold on to throughout the way you operate as a business? And then what are the values that the audience or the customers are seeing? And they can be two separate like set of values, but it's so important to always understand that and use those as a common thread throughout everything that you produce, whether it's a post on Instagram or an actual product or an actual event, etc. I think that's like so important.
Excellent. All right. So, you got New York, Georgia, Berlin. Any other places we can see Rachel Doyon making a stop in the next few years? Or are you trying to settle down like your mom?
Well, I mean, London's definitely on the books, as well as Paris. I still need to travel around Asia and South America, but I am looking to invest in real estate. So I actually bought my mom a house last year, and I'm looking to build out my real estate portfolio. And I'm definitely going to be looking for some spot in the South and maybe in Europe. I'm not sure.
Sounds amazing. Rachel, what's the best way for folks to find out more and connect with the team at Collabarét?
So they can find us on Instagram at Collabarét. That's Collabaret.
Excellent. Rachel Doyon, thank you so much. Wish you the best of luck. Now, the clock's ticking. You're not allowed to be living in Berlin for much longer. So good luck finding that next spot. And thank you very much for taking the time to chat with us today.
Thank you, Joe.
You are welcome. And that's it for another episode of the Forbes Books Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, make sure you take a second to subscribe wherever you are listening so you automatically get new shows when they drop. Also, if you have a minute, I would love if you left us a review so more amazing entrepreneurs like yourself can discover the show. And please, don't forget the golden rule and treat others as you want to be treated. Thanks for listening. Until next time, adios.